I feel like in our day and age, the role of the historian has become that much more important in the sense that I feel like the historian, in many ways, acts as somebody who deconstructs the narratives that we've been taught or the narratives that we have been given or perceive as a given. And joining me today is Amir Webb, who is such a character, who is an historian. I'm so happy to have you on, bro.
I'm good to be here.
Yeah, so I just want to go straight into it, man.
Okay.
We're talking Civil War, Reconstruction, the South of America.
hmm
What were the kind of events, or why did the Civil War of America happen? Because what this is what I've been taught, and I've been taught from from being in the British school and maybe further reading. And is this correct to say that the Civil War was started because the South wanted to keep the institution of slavery as the North didn't? Is that true?
That is partially true. So when we talk about the Civil War, there's a couple of things to really unpack here and understand. Number one, the North of America did not hate slavery. They weren't
Hmm.
anti. They were okay with slavery as long as it was in the South. The problem was,
Okay.
as America was expanding to out west, the South wanted to bring slaves too, and the North did not want that. All the North said was keep your slaves in the South, and everyone's happy. Everything is okay. The South. So here's an important thing to understand too. When the war started, the South produced 2/3 of the cotton in the world. Now that's a
Okay.
lot of cotton, right?
Yeah.
And to expand on that kind of cultural economic side, they wanted to expand in the West. Well, they needed slaves too. So if you can't bring your
Of course.
slaves, then you have a problem in how do we get the cotton picked and plucked and all that. So that's where
Hmm.
the rift really came in, where trying to bring slaves from the South in the western part of America.
Hmm. Okay, so then it's not then this narrative that we've been taught that the North or the whites in the North all of a sudden had this kind of change of heart towards
Right.
slavery, and they became some abolitionists. People we hear it so many times, as Trump would say, no one done more for black people in America besides perhaps Abraham Lincoln, referring to
Right.
the Emancipation Proclamation.
Right.
So that's totally false. This thing, I mean, and I feel like it kind of proves that people are very complex because on the one hand, yes, Abraham Lincoln did, kind of abolish the institution of slavery. But on the other hand, we find that Abraham Lincoln said had very racist views towards black people.
Right. And let's sit there for a second, right? Lincoln, early in his career, believed like he believed this to his core. Blacks and whites were not equal, right? He believed this
Hmm.
to his core. But to be
Hmm.
fair, he was someone over time that changed his views on blacks. He really
Okay.
did, right? And we know this for a couple, like the example of this. America did not recognize Haiti as a country until he said so, right?
Oh wow.
He
Okay.
was the he was the first one to say Haiti is a country that America will have partnership on, and deal with, right? So
Hmm.
he is the one that established that, and I think that kind of gets lost in the historical part of talking about this. You know what I mean?
Okay.
So I want to be sure that I do say that although he had beliefs that were racist, over time
Yeah.
he did have a slight change of heart to the point where he believed that we could vote and own
Yeah.
land, and he got there over time.
Okay, okay, fair enough, fair enough. That's good. That's a very good point of correction, actually. I think many people do just say, oh, you lot quote Abraham Lincoln, but he was a racist. But it's good to know that he did have a change of heart over time.
You know,
But in going back into the Civil War, okay, so America wants to, so let's paint the picture, paint the
okay.
scene. America wants to expand out west.
hmm
And expand their territory, their landmass, and the South wants to do so whilst keeping slaves, but the North says no, and then
Right.
that leads to the Civil War.
Pretty much. I think that paints. I think yeah, yeah.
And just as a point of history, was the Confederacy set up before the Civil War?
Yes. So the state started to leave the Union before Lincoln got into office. They saw this kind of
Okay.
storm brewing and said, we want no parts of America now. Like, we want nothing to do with you
Okay.
guys. We're out of here, right? We're
Yeah.
we're out of
Yeah.
here. And it's important to know that these states left before he came into office, but they left peace, right? They were
Oh,
allowed to
okay.
just leave the Union, and no one really said anything about it. And to the detriment of
Oh,
himself
wow.
and the country, Lincoln believed he could bring the states back into America with no issues at all. That he could like negotiate slavery on the side, and the South
Okay.
was not having. They were not having it. But before he even got into office, states were leaving the Union and talking about it.
Okay, so southern states are beginning to leave slowly, peacefully, to say, you know what, these crazy northerners are talking all this abolition talk. We want nothing to do with it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Civil War breaks out, and then this is the North versus the South. Yes,
yes.
the North win.
The North wins the war on the field,
Okay.
right? And this is important to understand also is that they are fighting two kinds of wars here, right? On the field, but
Okay.
also in the classrooms, right? In the capitals, or, like these
Okay.
laws are, while the South eventually comes to terms with that, we may have to end slavery, they never came to
Yeah.
terms with black people are equal to white people. That's
Mm.
that is the issue, right? That even though the war is over, we know we lost the war. Black people will never be our equals, and then you get into Jim Crow laws and Black Code laws and
Yeah.
segregation and all these things.
Okay. So let's unpack that further then. So paint the picture for me. Civil War ends, and
Hmm.
then I read up General Sherman. They get this promise of 40 acres and a mule.
Right. So this was a action done by him mainly to get black folks to stop following him around the South. Because everywhere that he went, black slaves, free slaves would just go wherever he went because that's where the protection was. And one day
Okay.
that this was in, I do believe Savannah or somewhere in Georgia, he got together with pastors and preachers and the like, and he asked them, "What can I give you to get you to stay here? Right? What do you need from us?"
Oh,
And
okay.
the black folks said, "We need a mule and land." And he said,
Okay.
"Sure thing." And that's when that ball started to roll. Now it's important to note this was never okayed by Congress or the White House, right?
Oh, okay.
This was never a law. This was just something that he was like, I can do this now and we'll deal with the backlash tomorrow. You know what I mean?
Okay.
So that's
I mean,
kind of where that
but
came
that
from.
that promise was never really fulfilled, was it?
No, no, no. In fact, when the war was over, right, and Lincoln's dead, right,
Yeah.
and so let me kind of go back a little bit, right? Reconstruction is trying to happen, right? You
Okay.
have the promises of land and money, and you can vote,
Just,
and all.
just just to cut you off, sorry to cut you off on that.
Mhm.
So after the war's over, is that when reparations are immediately paid to the slave owners or the former slave owners?
So they're being paid throughout the war. You know what I mean? Like they're being paid throughout the war.
Oh,
This
like
is important.
bribed.
Not even bribed, but slave. It's important to know also that slaves were thought of as property, right? They are nothing
Yes.
more than a cow or a chicken or a pig. And if you steal a
Wow.
pig, you have to pay whoever you stole the pig from. Like that's just what you have to do.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
slaves were nothing more than a pig. And when I say this, at times I cringe, but as a historian, I have to keep that fact in the forefront of my mind. That this is why
Okay.
I study this because people were property. So
Yep.
throughout the war, as slaves either ran away, were shot and killed, or what have you, slave owners were being paid by either the North
Mhm.
or the South.
Okay.
And important also to note that the Union would allow slavery wherever they were. So in New Orleans, in the beginning,
Mhm.
1862, New Orleans, while it is still in the South, slavery is allowed to flourish there because the Union says so. So
Okay.
you have certain spots like in Kansas, in Louisiana, where the Union is there, the North is there, and the laws of the land still stand. You can have slaves and beat them or what have you, and everything's fine.
Wow. Wow. Okay. So then now, in carrying on talking about reconstructions, what is reconstruction? When we say reconstruction, I mean we know it's the coming together of the states as one union again. But what is exactly happening on the ground at this time?
So Reconstruction was pretty much trying to get the South reorganized politically and labor wise, right? So
Okay.
when we're talking about the South, we're talking about a part of the country that really ran on slaves and their and everything that they did. Once
Mm-hmm.
that's over, right, you have just after a war is over, right, you have really no land to use to farm because they burned everything. They
Mm-hmm.
destroyed all the crops. You no longer have slaves to plant the crops, and states are still mad. States are still like, we're going to join again, but on what terms are we going to join on? And then you have
Mm-hmm.
like millions of black people who don't have an education, land, but they have skills, right?
Yes.
So what Reconstruction was is trying to fit the states back in the Union and freed slaves into becoming Americans. Because until that point, they weren't
Okay.
Americans. But how? But
Yeah.
they want education and jobs, and that's when you get into sharecropping and schools.
Please tell
And
us what is sharecropping.
sharecropping is a very complex issue. So sharecropping is when you, as a worker, right, pay
Yeah.
someone to work the land. That's pretty much
Yes.
what
So,
it is.
so yeah, what I've understood, I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong,
Mm-hmm.
is that it's to do with, okay, former slaves need to kind of earn money
Mm-hmm.
and obviously earn a living and kind of build income. So they would work the lands and
Mm-hmm.
pay to work, almost like a renting a plot of land basically.
Right,
And the owner of that land will receive some money as well as receiving some of the part of the crop in which they've harvested or whatever it may be. Is
right.
that a correct description of it, or
That's
maybe
correct.
a
That's
dumbed down
that.
version of it?
Well, that's right. But there's also the part where you could not afford to own hose or a horse,
Yeah.
or so what would happen was the owner of the land would rent these things to them, and when the end of the year was up, even if you had a profit, well, you use my horse and my hoe and my land,
Oh wow.
and really you wouldn't really have much left at the end of the year.
And exactly what I've read as well, they instituted very strict labor laws where people either had choice of becoming a sharecropper for a year,
Hmm.
or you'd get in prison for homelessness and get
Right.
trapped in jail. So you didn't really have a choice.
So you had these laws where if you couldn't prove that you had a job, you
Hmm.
were going to jail, where you had to work anyway, where they put you on a chain gang, right? So
Wow.
and this is how they reconstructed labor. They had to put black people somewhere to work. So if you weren't going to work here, oh, they were going to have you work over there and in jail. And another thing they
Mm.
did was they would put blacks to work as quote unquote apprentices, where they don't have to pay you. You can work for free, and now we call them internships, right? You have
I mean,
even
you saying this straight away just makes me think of the industrial prison complex we have today in modern
right,
day.
right. It's from slavery. That's where you get it from.
100%.
You know?
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible. Okay, so Reconstruction happens. They're trying to now reimagine the states now,
Hmm.
whilst recognizing the humanity, or at least trying to include the humanity of Black people, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, okay,
Mm-hmm.
and moving on, I want to just get you to touch on, if you don't mind now. So, we have Booker T. Washington, the story of Booker T. Washington,
Hmm.
former slave who, I mean, sorry, he's born into slavery actually, but he becomes emancipated, I think he's when he's very young. I wanted to kind of get just your opinion. People
Hmm.
say, oh, we have to take the Booker T. Washington approach, or which we know we've got to take the W.E.B. Du Bois approach. And Booker T is all
Hmm.
about doing for self, and W.E. Du Bois is always talking about you must demand your rights from the white man, whatever it may be. Even though I think that the dichotomy which is created, I think is
Hmm.
quite dumbed down for people. I think it's much more complex than that. But just
Yeah.
you as a person, what do you think?
So this is very complicated, right? Because I think my whole thing was, well, why do we have to pick one, right? Why do we need to pick
Hmm.
one? We can chew gum and walk at the same exact time, right?
Of course.
So my answer to this, and I've been asked this before, my answer to this is when America was founded, right? America was founded, even though they disagreed on slavery, they pushed that aside and said that's unimportant now, right? We'll have slavery,
Hmm.
we'll worry about that tomorrow, right? Why do we need to worry about how we get there now when we could do them both? There's nothing stopping Black people in America from doing both.
Okay.
It has to be this way or that way. I think that stops us from progressing at times. You know what I
Of
mean?
course. No, I agree with you. I totally agree with you. And I feel it's very, I think the best of the black tradition is that you embrace many ways of doing things.
Right.
There's no one way to solve a problem, many of times anyway.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
So Reconstruction happens, and then obviously then we have the legacy. Okay, Black Code laws, Jim Crow laws, the violence in the South, which takes
Oh the
place against Black people.
the violence. You know, the violence was.
I know. Yeah. Let's talk about the violence. I mean, it's such a heavy topic, but if you don't mind, what things were Black people subjected to in the South?
Well, what weren't they for it? Like what you know, like it
Yeah,
really
for
is
real.
what didn't happen to Black people in the South. So what the South really didn't like being told what to do, right? So
Okay.
let me backtrack a little bit, right? The South loses the war. Now the question
Yeah.
that they have as folks from the South is, well, why did we lose the war, right? What happened to
Okay.
us to make us lose the war? And while there are answers in plenty, the one main
Hmm.
answer was, well, the Southerners fought a gentleman's war. We didn't burn down crops, right? We didn't throw folks in jail, right? We lost because we were the gentlemen during this entire crisis. So the war is over, and the North still has their armies in the South after the war is
Okay.
over. And the Southerners did not like this. Not only did we lose the war, now when I leave my house, I have to see a soldier who may or may not be African American telling me what to do.
Hmm.
They did not like this. When
Hmm.
Charleston when Charleston fell, Black troops liberated South Carolina, right?
Wow.
So you had Black troops with guns marching where there used to be slaves. This is an
Wow.
anathema to white people. How yesterday you were slaves and now you're in the you're a captain in the army or what have you, right?
Hmm.
So then, on top of that, you lose the war, you lose your crop, you don't have your land. Now, Reconstruction is being forced upon us because the South did not want to give Black people any rights whatsoever. So
Wow.
now you have the very social class that the South is founded on, and really America, but that the South is founded on being flipped upside down. So while you have
Hmm.
while they're trying to reconstruct it, the South really didn't want much to change. So how do you put Black
Okay.
people back in their spot that you had them in? Through violence, through the lynching and the laws and the hangings and the castration, and all of these things were
And the
done.
sterilizations and all these things these heinous things that took place. In terms of historical perspective, was this the time that the Klan was formed?
So the Klan was formed during this time frame.
Okay.
It was founded by former Confederate soldiers, right? And
Okay.
to and it started out as nothing more than a veterans group trying to reclaim the South, but not really through violence, right? Through
Okay.
pamphlets and books. It wasn't until much later that they took to the streets with the hoods and the lynchings and and whatnot. But the Klan was a massive organization in its height. They had folks
Hmm.
in Congress,
Wow.
and this was a organization founded on the fact that Black people are inherently inferior.
Yep.
So I want to go back to why the South lost, because
Yes.
there are, in my mind, the main reason why they lost is the lack of planning in terms of agriculture. And this is
Okay.
important, and this is very important because I don't think a lot of folks talk about this. When you talk about the war, it's usually the war itself, on the field, or the politics.
Yeah.
The South was an agricultural land. This is what they did. The two biggest crops
Yes.
that they had was cotton and tobacco. The two biggest
Hmm.
crops. This was their
Yeah.
cash cow. The problem is when you're a nation independent, you can't eat cotton, you can't eat tobacco.
Mm,
So,
okay. Okay.
how do you feed the folks that you've now told you're no longer Americans, right? The government in the South now has a problem. How do we feed all these
Hmm.
people?
Hmm.
The
Hmm.
president of the South said he told folks plant less cotton and tobacco and plant corn. Plant more
Okay.
corn, plant less cotton and tobacco. Now,
Hmm.
some of them said, sure, I will do whatever you say. And others said, wait a second. The war is being fought because we're being told what to do, and now you're telling us what to do. Right? So this is
Yeah.
inherently against what the Confederacy was founded upon. So what do
Yes.
you do? What do you do? Some people said, I will go on and plant corn. And some people say, I'm not planting any corn. I'm a cotton farmer. This is what I do cotton, right? But the problem is people are now starving in droves. People like
Okay.
you you can't buy anything because now the trading between the North and the South is done, right?
Hmm.
You're trying to print your own currency, which is worthless.
Wow.
Now, while the South was having all these issues, in the North, complete opposite. Um,
Hmm.
Lincoln in 1982, I'm sorry, 1862, founded the
Yeah.
Department of Agriculture to help,
Okay.
kind of give farmers what they had to have from the government.
Okay.
So
Okay.
you have a country in the South that could not feed itself, had no cash, and meanwhile is still trying to fight a war on multiple fronts. So of course the
Yeah.
South is going to lose. I mean, I don't want to say it's inevitable, but the writing's there. It's on the wall, right?
Okay.
So,
Okay.
so speed that up. The war is lost, and blacks are
Yep.
are now able to vote. White
Yep.
folks hate it.
Hmm.
Reconstruction was simply where do we all fit into the grand scheme of things, right? The social order is
Okay.
now flipped upside down. Blacks can vote. We don't have slaves anymore. Women now are like, we want rights too, right? So now you're like what's really happening in America? So
Hmm.
I think the agricultural thing though, I think that is such a big part of it because black people were the main driving force of it in the South for so long, and the natives too, right? And the natives
Yes.
too. I don't want to say just black people. I want to give it
Okay.
to the natives too, because when the Americans, quote unquote, first got here, they starved, but it was the natives that taught them how to work the land.
Oh, wow.
So America was founded on that idea of people who work on the land, toil in the land, are closer to God. Right. This is
Okay.
something that a narrative that was throughout America's history. But those qualities of goodness and working were never given to blacks and natives, even though we were the main agriculturalists in the country,
Wow.
right? So very early on, America had this dichotomy of they they can work, but we won't grant them the kind of ethics that we see in ourselves to them because we want to keep them down, which I will always
Okay.
find ironic.
I mean, it doesn't seem like a lot has changed in many ways.
No.
But what I want to ask you, if so from your reading of the literature at the time,
Mm-hmm.
what would you say of you mentioned black people, they liberated certain towns,
Mm-hmm.
they fought in the army to abolish the institution of slavery. We have the Harriet Tubmans and many others like her.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say then? Let's go back to our brother Kanye West, who says that 400 years. This sounds like a choice.
Right.
Clearly, what would you say to that then? I know. I mean, obviously, we can debunk that robustly, but the
Right.
thing of your reading of the literature, and I want to tie it back into to Booker T. Washington.
Hmm.
When you hear him say that, let's let black people just focus on, let's not demand civil rights. Let's just get our head down, work, and show we are of value to white people, basically. And then, they will include us in their planning and, people similar to that. So going back, tying that back into what Kanye West said, was it ever a thing where black people just stood down and said, we're going to accept our fate?
No, not in
Okay.
masses. This is just not true. And we have the evidence. You can open up a magazine, a paper from 1820, and see the advertisements of black people that ran away, right?
Okay.
You wouldn't put laws in place if black people knew their place. There'll be no
Exactly.
reason to codify slave laws if slaves weren't resistant.
It must be happening en masse then, isn't it?
Right. It had slave insurrections were plentiful on small scale and big scale, right? Not
Yeah.
every slave insurrection has to be this group of slaves coming down a field with guns and you know what I mean. That's not what it is. Sometimes it's as easy as I don't want to work. I take sick, right?
Okay.
It could be that simple. I lie and say I broke something and now I can't work.
Yeah.
It really
Mm,
can be that simple. But I think
okay.
in Kanye's mind, and I don't want to speak for Kanye, but hey, here it is. He's looking on it as how can someone spend so much time doing the same thing if it's not a choice?
Yeah.
Now, to go back to Washington, like I was just talking about, black
Yeah.
people have always worked the land. That's what we were
Yes.
brought here to do. White people knew we could work. That's why we're here in the first place.
Yeah.
So I never really understood that line of thought
Yeah.
because what it does is trying to prove to white people what we already know that they know.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, moving into more, let's say, modern manifestation and modern day arguments, then you, as someone
Mm-hmm.
who studied the history and the brutality, what do you say, or what's your take on the argument of removing Confederate statues, for example?
It's funny because I study that too, my friend.
Okay. This is why I got you on.
So there's multiple issues here, right? These
Okay.
when the war is lost, people are trying to look for blame somewhere.
Okay.
Northerners are saying naturally former Confederates are rebels,
Hmm.
non-American, and racist and hateful. And why would you want to kind of memorialize that with a statue?
Okay.
White women in the South, I don't want to say had nothing to do, but this was their field
Yeah.
to kind of organize the cultural resurrection of the South.
Okay.
So they would put statues in graveyards and they would put flowers on them. And this was just, what they did. And everyone was happy. Everything was fine. Eventually, these statues started to be put in parks, on government land,
Okay.
at
Okay.
state houses, and black people would see these.
Okay.
It was a reminder to us of remember where you are. Remember that even though we
Mhm.
lost the
And I
war,
think it's important to note, isn't it, that a lot of these statues were much after the war, no?
much after the war is over. And the funny thing is, I shouldn't say much. I would say maybe 1890 is when you start to see them really get large in parks
Okay.
and in
Okay.
state houses. And but to just answer what I think about them, I think they should be removed.
Okay.
But if you're going to remove those statues of slave owners and slavers, you need to do a serious look at statues of Thomas Jefferson and George Washington,
Hmm.
who are just as
Exactly.
equally as brutal as Robert E. Lee ever was. The only
Wow.
thing that the white folks have a problem with is that the the nationality thing, right?
Yes.
the the problem of well they're Americans and we can all get behind that, right? We should all be able to get behind
Yeah.
that. America is for Americans, but
Hmm.
black people have never really felt American in general.
Hmm.
I mean, if
Hmm.
you look at all the laws being passed, even today, it's just not happening. So if
Exactly.
you're going to remove Robert E. Lee and all those, talk about Jefferson and Washington and all those folks who we oh so love in American ideology. Take those down too. I'm sure if
Okay.
we open up a book, we can pick someone who did not own slaves to put a statue up for.
No, no, totally, totally. So, in terms of your reading of the history and modern day issues on race relations,
Mhm.
how much is it just a modern manifestation of those things that happened in the past and it's taken a different form? And how much of that history do you think informs the way Black people are viewed in America today? And then, tied into that, please talk about the migration north as well and why that took place. So, please feel free to tackle those in any order you like.
Sure. So the migration north, the war is
Yeah.
over. Blacks are being, you know, mistreated, and they wanted places to go. So a lot of them,
Yes.
like my family personally, we went from North Carolina to to to,
Yeah.
to, to Washington, in
Yeah.
D.C., and that's where we just
Okay.
stayed. That's where we stayed. My grandma
Okay.
owned a restaurant. I'm in D.C. for years, and that's just
Wow.
what we did. But they went to Chicago and St. Louis and New York and Cleveland, all these kind of cities where, while they never had slavery, they really didn't like black people, but Southern racism is different than Northern racism.
In what
Not,
sense?
well, in the sense where in the South, I want to
Is it that
say,
thing of the North is like that nice old that good old racism that we're all used to nowadays? The guy
right,
that doesn't call you an N word to your face, but he's
right,
still the liberal, the neoliberal,
right.
basically.
It's more easy to live
Yeah.
with, right? It's more easy to live
Yes.
with. I'd rather not.
I was gonna ask you that as a personal point.
Mhm.
Where do you stand? Do you stand that I'd rather the guy not call me an N word and want to lynch me and talk behind my back, or would you be the or you someone? Well, I'd rather have the devil I know than opposed to the one I don't know. What do you stand personally on that?
Call it to my face, man. Like, to be honest with you, I'd rather you say it to my face. I know where
It's
you
really
stand. I know where you stand.
okay.
I know you.
Okay.
I know you hate me. I hate you too. Yeah. All right. What more?
Okay.
What more can be said? What
Fair
more can
enough.
be said?
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Um, but like here in DC now, you have a lot of Trumpers who kind of walk the line of I'll call you the N word, but I'll stand in line. I'm with you at Starbucks. So
Oh, okay.
it's very awkward sometimes. Like they have a
Yeah,
hat
I can
on. You're
imagine.
like, come on, man. And you lost the election. What more? Why are you still here? Anyways, so they go to Chicago and New York and places, but I do believe a lot of what America is dealing with is because we never reckoned with the past. And we probably never will.
Mm,
I don't think in masses we ever will truly reckon with the past. And I say this because this.
okay.
As someone who studied children's literature in the South, they
Okay.
did a very good job at codifying white supremacy as nationalism, right? I
Okay.
mean, it was so ingrained that blacks are inferior and all these other things of the sort, and it's never going away because the books that they wrote in 1862, you can still get them on Amazon. They're not going
Oh
away,
wow.
and they're being sold out too. It's not like they're just there; they're being sold out. So what? What?
Wow.
What?
Books that actually like teach that black people are
Oh
inferior
yeah, you can still
and
get
these
it from
things.
Amazon. Like I find them in
Wow.
bookstores because I go out there and look because I collect them.
Yeah.
So, but you can still get these books. As a matter of fact, I was in New Orleans a month ago, and I went to
Yeah.
a museum dedicated to the South, and
Okay.
they're still selling books on Robert E. Lee and all of the other guys, coloring books on Robert E. Lee and Jeff Davis,
Wow.
all the people. And these are just books that a kid, being a kid, just believes in. Like it's a regular book. And then they grow up with this
Wow.
idea that, well, my history of the South is kind of sanitized, so yours can't be right. But sure.
Wow. So okay, I mean, it's Do you? But I mean, and surely you believe there can be improvements, though, in it.
I do believe there can be improvements, but the problem is they have to be improvements of white people, and I
A
don't think,
100%,
they
hundred
want to
percent,
improve. I don't think they want to improve, man. Why would you want to improve on a system that loves you, that you built,
100%,
and the
a
liberals
hundred
too?
percent.
The liberals too. Why would you want to improve a system that benefits you?
Mhm.
They got to take a good look at themselves, man. A good look at
A
themselves and
hundred
say,
percent.
you know, even though I'm American, do I love, you know, my Americanness and whiteness that much? I don't know.
It's interesting you said that. I mean, the episode I released today, actually, earlier on today, was about. I spoke to a white man about this. He calls himself an abolitionist of whiteness.
Oh.
And yeah, I sent you the link actually. He was talking about he's got a book called The Image of Whiteness, and I
Mm-hmm.
read and even me as a black man, I was like, whoa, some of the stuff you're saying, not that I necessarily disagree with his argumentation. I
Mm-hmm.
just his approach is really like he's really someone that tries to get white people to think basically. And he was
Mm-hmm.
saying that there's no way you can identify as being white, which I don't. So I didn't actually agree with him, but he was saying there's no way you can identify as being white without it coming with subjugation and oppression. Because he said that if you ask white people when you say, "Oh, white pride," or "I'm proud," I'm just proud to be where I'm from. It's always almost as if inextricably linked with the thing of colonization or empire or war. And I thought, okay, it made me think. I personally do
Mm-hmm.
feel like his approach may get a lot of people's backs up and might not be as receptive as it could be. But I feel
Yeah.
like, okay, there's something to be listened to there at least.
I think he's right. I mean, there is no pan whiteness.
Yeah,
Not that I know of. Like there is no
it's
like.
true.
I mean, the closest you may have is now where you have Trump and folks like Trump, but I mean,
Yeah.
whiteness in general has always been destructive globally. I mean, Britain.
Boys,
Gee,
don't get me don't get me cancelled. Yeah, I'm joking. I don't I don't mind these open conversations. I think it's interesting. Anyway, let's talk about just a couple more things if you don't mind. It
sure.
was interesting when I just want to. I've mentioned this girl so many times. People think I'm obsessed with her. I'm actually not. I just have. I can't lie. I have a deep hatred of and not of the individuals, but I have a deep hatred of the archetype of black individuals who say things to
Hmm.
make themselves just more palatable for white people, and
Hmm.
or they are used as filters for white supremacy. So let's
Hmm.
talk about this statement when Candace Owens was asked, and this is the individual in question.
Hmm.
She said she was asked, when was America ever great for black people? And she says that it was great for black people just after slavery. They were generating wealth. They were, setting up generational wealth as well. They were working hard. They had a good work ethic, blah, 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 etc., etc. What would be your response as an actual historian and not someone who's just clearly she has no knowledge of social history? What would be your response to that? America was great for black people when slavery was initially just abolished.
That's such a weird statement. That's such a weird statement because the highlight of okay, you can easily make the claim that right after slavery, the
Hmm.
largest gains of black people were really after slavery. You can make that argument. And as a historian, I'll say, sure, but that was only because the government put their hand down and said, give them rights. It wasn't like black people suddenly
Okay.
just worked harder. No, we've always
Yep.
worked
Yep.
hard. Like that's why we were brought here. The government
Yep.
stepped in. The government stepped in and said,
Okay.
you have to give people, you have, this time frame that you're talking about is when the North was sending armies down here to quell the KKK, to fight the KKK, right?
Wow.
These are times when they had a whole agency in the government dedicated to helping black people. So when
Yep.
you say this was the time, of course, because we had that assistance that white people had. Of course,
Hmm.
it makes perfect sense. But
Hmm.
now you have people who are kind of afraid to take the assistance of the government because it looks bad. That's what the government is here for. That's literally what a government does, to care for the
That's
people.
super interesting, actually. That's
And
super. You
you
have so
know,
the Republican argument that we have to just do for self. No one can do for us, and they blame the Democrats for it. I mean, maybe we can speak about. I do want to go just touch a bit on contemporary issues a bit, but this whole dichotomy then that Republicans are just do for self, and Democrats are they've destroyed initiative amongst Black people.
You
What
know,
would you say?
I say that's no. I would say that's definitely not at all the case. But
Okay.
when you talk about incentives from the government,
Yes.
I don't understand what you want from the government. Like, of course, that's what they're there for, to give you help, and you can help yourself. Now, the argument
Yes.
of, well, then you'll never help yourself. If you've ever been to public housing in America, it is nothing to stay
Yes.
in. It is nothing to
Of
to
course.
to gloat about. You know what I mean? If
Yes.
you get assistance, if you get food stamps, you still need help.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like it's enough to feed your family with. You're still
Mm-hmm.
struggling. The government isn't so. Okay, let me quickly. I'm getting excited here. There are two schools. There are two schools of thought there, right? And
Yeah.
the question is, what does the government do? What is it for?
Yes.
Is it to a make things fairer for people, or
Mm-hmm.
B, cement the status quo? Because it can't do both.
Okay.
You can't do both.
Yes.
So the question I would ask is, what do you believe the government is here to do? To make things
Mm-hmm.
fair for people who can't help themselves, and or keep the status quo. Now,
Mm-hmm.
when she says that was a time where black folks were the most, what's the word she used? Impressive, or something of the sort.
No, no, no. When was America ever great? It was great for
Okay,
black people. Yeah.
right. This was the time when America was trying to make things fairer. The one
That's so true.
time, the one
That's so true.
time the entire federal government was trying to make things fairer was during the time she's talking
Wow.
you know. So of course that's the answer because we had the assistance. But now you
Mm.
can't say assistance is bad and then glorify this time frame. It's
Of
nonsense.
course.
It's
Of
nonsense.
course. Of course, no, absolutely, absolutely. But just finally, on modern day, this argument again, for me, I've always said stems from, sorry, the Booker T. Washington W.E. Du Bois thing. I've seen many black people actually saying, black Republicans, if we followed Booker T. Washington, we'd be in a much better place today in America. We would have just done for self, had generational wealth, and that's the only way we would have been respected in this country. But we sided with the NAACP, and again, I feel like again these binary readings of things are never paint the full picture.
Right.
Personally, when I understand these things, but just you as a person, what approach is a good approach, for example, and what approach do you personally subscribe to, and do you see that works well? Is it the kind of Democrat approach to kind of big government, big help, or the kind of Republican approach, just kind of do for self? And that's not me saying I definitely recommend you can be a Republican in terms of values,
Yeah.
of if it's going to be a black Christian, for example, and all these kind
Right.
of things, who you might disagree on some social issues, which are fine. I think are totally fine. But this kind of approach for black people, we just decided with Democrats and we haven't gotten anywhere. We have to do for self, or do you think it's a combination of the two?
I think naturally it's a combination of the two, you know.
Yeah,
But I will say this. When you look at Democrats and Republicans, neither one really care about us.
of
But
course.
Republicans say, well, they don't care about us, and the Democrats say they don't care about us either. So why not just vote vote your conscience? I'm all for if you're a black person who voted for Trump,
Yeah, yeah,
I'm okay with you. I think it's stupid. I don't understand it, but I get it. You vote for someone who you believe will help make America, great again. Now, in between that, you have to deal with the KKK who supports him, the neo-Nazi that
yeah.
support him. You have to deal with that too. When they come to your doorstep, you won't say, "Wait a second." No, you won't. You won't do that.
Yeah,
So if you
yeah.
vote for Trump and you're black, I don't have any real issues with you. You know what I mean?
Okay.
My problem is you're going to have to deal with the same things that we deal with, who did not vote for Trump.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah,
and even if you
and
voted for
and I,
Joe
and I think you
Biden,
got, yeah, yeah.
same issue, same issue.
And I think you gotta be honest though. I feel like this thing of black people are becoming Republican and this and all these things and are more pro Trump. And I feel like okay, you can say that because yes, Trump increased his vote share by 4% amongst black men. But let's
Black
be
men,
honest,
yes, yes,
the overwhelming majority of black people did reject Trump. Let's be honest
yes,
here. I think us saying about these minutiae numbers of 4% when we can talk about the 30% of Latinos that did, or the 30% of queer people that did, is
Right.
much, it's much of a less margin, much of a more of a margin in comparison to black people.
Yeah.
Overwhelmingly, black people rejected Trumpism, and I think that's very, a poignant point that has to be that has to be kind of drummed about. I personally feel.
Yeah, we don't like them. We see them. We definitely see
Yeah.
them. But then I look at the black men who voted for Trump. And then my
Hmm.
question is, well, what do you see in Trump that you see in yourself to make you vote for him? Is it
We know
the
it. I mean, we
the
can have a pretty
toughness, you
yeah, this
know?
thing of like, oh well, it's to be a man still. To say it as it is. Ironically, I think it's an insecurity, if I'm honest.
I believe it too, because I look at Trump as someone who's not intelligent per se.
Exactly.
He doesn't really read, or he can't express himself in a proper way. I don't see the draw for someone like myself, a black man who would look at him and say, I want to be that. I want to vote for that. I just don't see it.
Hmm. No, I feel you. I feel you. I feel you. And what do you think of this thing of, finally, people say, oh, again, young people say the Gen Z lot. I'm not from the
I'm
Gen Z.
millennial.
I
I'm
just missed the
millennial.
I'm
I'm not
millennial as
millennial.
well. Okay, okay, okay. Same, same. I am. So they say things like, you hear like, oh, we gave you MLK, it didn't work. We give you Malcolm, didn't work, and now you don't be surprised if we give you Nat Turner, for example.
Hmm,
Is that where things are heading in your estimation? Are
no,
people getting fed up now? Is no? Okay,
we never get set up to that point. Nat Turner was
okay,
on a small scale. Black Americans, out of all the displaced Africans from the
yeah,
slave trade, right? You have black people who
yeah,
went to South America and Cuba
yeah,
and Haiti and blah blah blah.
yeah.
Black Americans are the only ones that talk to hate the country that they're currently in, right? You don't see
Mm-hmm.
black Cubans saying I hate Cuba, I hate it here on masses. They don't reject their Cubanness.
Mm-hmm.
You don't see
It's
black
true. It's
folks
true.
in Brazil who reject their Brazilianness. If that's even a word.
It's
You
true.
don't see black
It's
folks
true.
in these countries that reject their core nationality. They speak the language, they're proud of it, and they go about their day. Even if they
Mm-hmm.
understand that because of their blackness, they're in a lower state, they don't reject the nationalist
Okay.
within them, and they're not told to, right? Black Brits,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think, reject their British side. I don't know. I'm not a but
No, I think I think yeah. I mean, they do feel British, but at the same time, Black British is very different. You lot,
oh yeah,
guys have been there for so long. I mean,
oh right,
comparison. I mean, look, I'm born '93, and I wasn't even born in the UK.
right, right.
Yes, I'm. Yeah. So, but yeah, please carry on.
So when you look at it like that, what is it about Americanness that rejects us? Well, because America rejected us, right? But we are
Hmm.
so heavily invested in the success of America. I
Hmm.
don't understand the go back to Africa bit. I'm looking at them
Yeah.
like you don't know what to do in any part of Africa. You don't speak the language. You don't know the food, the
It's
culture.
true.
If Black Americans went back to Africa, they will act like white people.
It's
It's
true.
it's just the truth. They have
Yeah.
no we have no idea what that means to be Africanness in Africa.
So true. It's
So
so
you go
true.
there, what are you going to do? You're going to change the people or yourself?
Yes.
I don't know. I would assume you would try and change the people instead of
Yeah.
yourself. But we are invested in the success of America. We always have been and probably always will be. The question is,
Yeah.
will America allow us to truly invest in America? We saw this
Mm.
election that black people handed Joe Biden the election.
Yep.
Detroit,
100%.
at Detroit, at Atlanta. These places are heavily
Georgia.
black. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
We handed him the election. Now we're looking at America like, okay, America, do what you're supposed to do. And the question is, will they? I don't know. I don't know.
Absolutely. Final question. Do you have any? Okay, I know you answered. I was gonna say, do you have any hope in the Biden Harris ticket then?
I have some hope. I have some hope.
Okay. You're an optimist.
No,
Thank
yeah.
you so much, bro. This has been I really
I
enjoyed this conversation,
I
man.
loved it,
I've
bro. I
really enjoyed
loved
this.
it.
Thank you. Now, thanks for coming on. You're listening to the Malcolm Effect, guys. I will post Amir's socials in the comments. Please be on look on that. You can find him on Twitter where he posts some really dope content. You're listening once again to the Malcolm Effect. Please like, comment, subscribe, show some love whether you're listening to on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. Until next time, peace out, guys.